Picture the moment he finally looks at you, absolutely bewildered. It is often described as the elephant in the room coming to life and stomping through the living room during a casual Tuesday dinner. The sheer confusion on his face isn't driven by malice, it is driven by genuine shock because, on the surface, everything appeared to be functioning perfectly. We have all grown up with pop culture conditioning us to believe that when a woman suddenly leaves, it is impulsive teenage rebellion, a snap decision made in the heat of passion, or a moment of madness where testosterone and ego completely overwrite logic. But true to form, the psychology of the Walkaway wife is rarely a sudden storm. It is actually a slow, agonizingly quiet calculation known as the depletion process. Emerging studies suggest that deep down, for many women, the relational savings account has finally run dry. And this departure is not a spontaneous act driven by adrenaline or drama. Think of your mind like a complex vessel slowly filling with water. For years, she might have been pouring in effort, cleaning up messes, listening to complaints, and carrying the mental load of two people. But instead of filling the tank, she allowed herself to slip into that water until she sank to the bottom. Eventually, she washes away the sand of the relationship until there is no solid ground left to stand on. It is not just that she is unhappy in the moment, it is that she is psychologically unlearned her own devotion to you. The brain stops firing the dopamine and oxytocin rewards associated with you, effectively turning the partner from a source of biological comfort into a source of daily psychological friction. This explains the absolute shock factor perfectly. The husband often sees a perfectly clean house, remembers the woman who shows up to family events, and yet feels a widening chasm opening between them. It looks like stability from the outside, but underneath, she has been underground, sinking deeper and deeper into isolation, surviving on adrenaline while waiting for the last emotional pipe to burst. The metaphor of the Walkaway wife isn't about a woman deciding to leave a party where she is having a good time. It is about a woman who wakes up one morning and realizes her vessel is full of bitter, stagnant water, not fine wine. It is the dark night of the soul, where the exhaustion is so profound that walking away isn't an act of violence, but a desperate biological survival mechanism to ensure she doesn't suffocate in her own relationship. You know the type. She's the woman who never complains, the one whose social media feed is a curated highlight reel of a perfect life, holding tightly to a family photo that doesn't quite match the silence suffocating the room behind the closed door. This is the dark side of high-functioning happiness that too often gets overlooked in the Walkaway wife narrative. We love to believe that if someone is doing everything right, they are happy. But in marriage psychology, maintaining a facade of perfection while internally crumbling is a distinct form of psychological paralysis. Imagine trying to hold your breath underwater for 8 hours a day, enduring demands, crying and cleaning, without taking a single gulp of air. That is the daily existence of a woman suffering from what clinical psychologists often refer to as smiling depression. She isn't just a victim of neglect, she is a victim of her own capacity to endure. She has spent 2 decades sublimating her needs to keep the peace, convincing herself that being a good wife means becoming invisible. Her well of empathy has run dry, not because she stopped caring, but because she has been emotionally hemorrhaging for years. When the Walkaway happens, it doesn't look like a sudden explosion of rage. Instead, it feels like a slow-motion train wreck where the brakes were removed years ago. It is a moment of rationalized selfishness. She decides that her mental health is worth more than her reputation or her marriage vows. She realizes that being a martyr to a relationship isn't a noble sacrifice, it's just an exit strategy. She leaves not out of hate, but out of a quiet, desperate need to reconnect with a version of herself she thought she had lost forever. And when she finally walks out that door, it's rarely because she stopped loving him. It's because she fell in love with herself for the first time in decades, and her marriage couldn't handle the shine. But this is just the beginning of what happens when emotional trust finally breaks, so keep watching to see the fallout. You know how people think a breakup happens in a moment of rage, right? That sudden explosion where a drawer slams shut and a suitcase falls to the floor. That's a movie script, not reality. When you're talking about the Walkaway wife syndrome, the finale is shockingly quiet. And the real clues are buried in the micro moments that happen months before she hands you the keys. Think of this stage as a psychological pre-trial. In her head, the jury has already delivered a verdict, but she hasn't told you the ruling yet. It begins with a subtle, terrifying shift in her eyes. It isn't a mean look, it's a vacancy. You catch her looking at you, and the second you make eye contact, she doesn't smile. She doesn't look up from her phone to engage. That pause, that's the exact moment the emotional lease is up. This is what we call a flat effect, a psych term that basically means she is emotionally anesthetizing herself. She is actively disconnecting to survive the stagnation. You reach out, you tell a joke, and she matches your energy with a nod that she's almost afraid to make. It's like she's guarding her own heart, brick by brick, until there's nothing left for you to burn down. And you absolutely have to watch for the silence. Don't confuse silence with peace. This is a different kind of quiet. The awkward vacuum where you desperately want to fill the air but realize that anything you say will fall into a void. You'll also spot the sarcasm, the driest, most passive-aggressive version of rejection. She isn't screaming, "I hate you," she's saying, "That's cute, honey," with a warmth that is so cold it actually burns. She's using irony to privatize her anger because she knows screaming at you is useless. But pointing out your flaws when she's supposed to love you, that's the only damage control left for her. She hasn't packed the bags yet, but she has already packed her heart. If you watch her eyes, you'll see there's no spark there, and once the detachment takes hold, there is no going back. Before the final door clicks shut, there is usually a long, slow, invisible process that resembles nothing more than a complex financial crisis. We are often conditioned to view a walkaway not as a calculated decision, but as a sudden emotional explosion. But for the partner who has been holding it together, silence isn't an absence of anger, it is the signal that the internal structure has finally given way. This is the crucial concept of the unvoiced dissatisfaction fund, and it is essentially a psychological savings account where she makes tiny deposits of emotion every single day. Driven by a primal fear of provocative conflict, consider the dynamic of the typical marriage. He swallows the biting comment when you forget an anniversary. She self-censors the frustration when you voice an unpopular opinion. She lets a single dirty dish pile up and tells herself it's not a big deal. These aren't monumental events, but in the grand architecture of a union, they act as the building blocks of resentment. Socialization plays a massive role here. Many women are raised in an environment where the cost of engaging with a partner is considered too high. So they choose the comparatively cheaper path of emotional suppression. They adopt a mantra of keeping the peace over being right, believing their future happiness is a secondary byproduct of their current support. But here is the part that confuses men the most. Resentment does not decay over time. Just like money in a financial institution, this emotional slush fund accrues compound interest. Slowly, unconsciously, that internal tolerance limit reaches a terrifying point of bankruptcy. This is not a sudden tantrum triggered by the dishes in the sink. It is the final realization that words no longer have the currency to fix the past. At this stage, she has exhausted her credit. The mental space where arguments used to be is now completely overwritten by the exhaustion of waiting for things to change. What looks like cold calculation or a sudden snap to you is actually the sheer exhaustion of running a marathon on a flat tire. She stops fighting because she is already lost, not against you specifically, but against the reality that her complaints have been erased. When she finally walks away without a sound, it's because she has forecasted that waiting for an apology is a losing bet. She has closed the account, and when the bank closes, there is no more money to withdraw. That specific kind of quiet departure is the loudest scream of all. Think of the ending not as a fire, but as a suffocating silence.